Hello everyone, this is Julia. Thank you so much for joining me on my craft room adventures. Today I have a Flippin Awesome card to share with you using lawn fawn stems and dies. And I saw this design a while back with the pop-up feature from a crafter called Jooyeon and I. I'm pretty sure I'm pronouncing that really badly. I will link her down below. And when I saw her card, it was amazing with the Flippin Awesome with a pop-up feature. And I just couldn't get it out of my head. And today I want to show you how I created a birthday version of a pop-up Flippin Awesome. I started out by stamping all of my images onto Neenah Solar White cardstock. And for my mice, I'm using E55, E53, E50, E51 and E50. I'm coloring all of the mice in the exact same way, and for my bear I'm using the same shades. I'm just leaving out the E55 to keep him a little bit lighter. So going in with E53 as my darkest shade, then E51, and then blending that out with the E50 marker. I'm also using a tiny bit of the E50 just over his tummy area, just so that it has a tiny bit of color. For my fox, I'm using E13 and E11 for the reddish areas, just to give him a little bit of a reddish brown color, but not too dark. I usually also use the E15, which I like, but for this card I wanted to keep him lighter. And for the whitish areas, I'm using W00. Just going in with a second layer of the E13, and then blending everything together with the E11. And I really hope that the length of this video didn't scare you away. I tried to cut it down, but I wanted to leave in all of the important steps, and this card is quite involved. It took me quite a long time to make, but I think it's such a cool effect with having the flip mechanism and also a little pop-up on there. I think it's just so much fun, so for me it was totally worth it, but it resulted in a bit of a longer video, so I hope you don't mind. For the cake layers, I'm using E30 markers, E35, E33, and E31. Just laying down my darkest shade. For those small areas, I'm just using one layer of each color, just blending everything together. Now with the E33, and then going in with the E31 to blend everything together. For lots of the other elements, I'm just showing you how I color one color combination, and I use the same color combo of markers on all the images. I just cut that out for time purposes because otherwise the video would have been about twice as long, which I thought was a bit excessive. So going in with my teal shades, I'm using BG49. I'm sorry I forgot to put the little cap there, but it's BG49. Blending that out with BG13. Just making sure I get a good transition. Then going in with BG11, leaving the lightest areas still white. I thought I could go in with BG70, but that did not work because it's just the wrong kind of tone. So I went back in with the BG49, blended that out with BG13, then again with BG11, and using the tip-to-tip technique between the BG13 and the BG11 to get a smoother blend between the two, and also tip-to-tip between BG49 and BG13. For my yellow shades, I'm using Y21, then the Y11, just as my main yellow shade, blending that out with Y00, and then Y000. For my greens, I'm using G02 as my darkest shade, just placing that wherever I think the shadows will be, blending that out with the G00, and then blending everything together with G000. For my pink purplish color, I'm using RV63, Then VO1. Going back in with RV63 as for a second layer, and the VO1, and blending that together with V000, and again using the tip-to-tip technique between the VO1 and the V000 to get a smooth blend. For my reddish shades, for the little beads on the cake, I'm also adding the R29, which I'm not using for any of the other reddish colors. Just blending that out with R22, which usually is way too dark to blend, but for the small an area it was fine. Now for the icing and the rest of the red shades, I'm just adding the R22 in the darkest areas. Then I'm going to blend out the R22 with R20. I'm sorry, I forgot the marker cap again. I was a bit all over the place because it was super hot that day, and I didn't want to leave my markers without their caps for too long because I was afraid that they would dry out because it was super warm here. So I just forgot to place them there. But I'm using the R20 to blend out the R22. Just going over the edges. Then I'm using the R00 to blend out the R20. And finally, for my lightest shade, I'm using R000, just to blend everything together. Then it was time to ink blend. I die cut the square piece for the Flippin Awesome 4 times out of Bristol smooth cardstock, and I die cut the base piece for the Flippin Awesome also out of Bristol smooth cardstock. Here I'm just ink blending this with tumbled glass, salty ocean, pine needles, and cracked pistachio, just to create like a sky look and a ground. I made sure to cover the backs of the pieces with a post-it note tape or post-it note that are cut to size, because for this kind of a card you need to ink blend both sides. So as you can see on the first card, I have the sky and the grass on one panel. Then you flip that over and that panel becomes the sky for the next one. So then this next piece, the front of this piece, will be the bottom for the second layer. I hope this makes sense. And the back will be the sky for the third layer. It will make sense once I assemble it, I promise. I fiddled around with it quite a bit to make sure that I got it right. Again, doing another grass piece. Placing my post-it note on top to protect the back, or to protect the ink blending so that I don't get any of the color on the back. And there you can see what I meant. So you have the grass and the sky, and then you flip it over, and then you have the panel that flips up has the sky color, and the panel that is still down has the grass color. Now I needed to figure out my last scene. So the top panel would only be sky. And this one doesn't need any ink blending on the back because you adhered flat to the Flippin Awesome mechanism. Now I also need to ink blend the base piece that pulls out. So I'm also ink blending that to match the last panel that I did before that. Just adding the tumbled glass and the salty ocean like I did before. And for the bottom, I'm using, again, the cracked pistachio and the pine needles. Now I want to add some shimmer to the sky pieces, so I'm using the liquid stardust and a little bit of water, and I'm adding some splatters. I added some post-it notes to protect the grassy areas. Now it was time to create my little pop-up cubes. So I cut a strip to about 2.5 inches. It was a little bit shorter, but in this case it really doesn't matter. You need to score it 4 times, 1/2 inch, 1 inch, 1.5 inches, and 2 inches, so that you end up with 4 score lines, and that creates your little cube. You just fold along all of the score lines, like I'm doing here. You make sure it folds flat. Then add glue to the inside of the one panel. Press it together. And that is your pop-up mechanism. I ended up needing 3 for this card, but you can add however many pop-up elements as you like. Now I wanted to assemble the Flippin Awesome, so I just folded along all of the score lines that the die created, making sure to fold it not just in one direction but in both directions. Also using my bone folder to reinforce everything, so that I would be sure that the mechanism would move smoothly once it's assembled. And when it's time to adhere all of the panels to the Flippin Awesome mechanism, be sure to remember the order we ink blended them in. So I added score tape to the flaps, the main piece, and between all of the score lines. And I'm using the sky piece that does not have any ink blending on the back. Then it was time to add a grass piece that has the sky on the bottom, which would flip up. And for the last 3, it's easy to remember because you always want the grass showing. Just removing the backing paper and placing the panel on it. So the first 3 have the grass showing, and the last has the sky panel because it pulls out into a really long scene, as you can see here. Just making sure it all moves smoothly. And that's the base of the Flippin Awesome done. Just making sure to press everything down so that it would hold up. For the first part of my sentiment, I'm using the Mice on Ice stamp set, and I'm using the Happy out of that one. And I'm just stamping it with Distress Oxide ink in Salty Ocean. I made sure to do that ahead of time because that takes a long time to dry before you can actually die cut it. And I also wanted it to say birthday on the bottom panel. So from the Wild For You stamp set, I'm using the birthday stamp. Just stamping that in VersaFine Onyx Black ink. And you could do that before, but to get the spacing right, I wanted it to be on the panel. And at this point, it's not that bulky at all, so it was fine to do it. Unfortunately, my camera cut out and I didn't record the adhering of my first panel, but they're basically all the same, at least for the first 3. So I'm just gluing down the gift boxes, making sure I align them about the same way as I did on the previous panel. So just using liquid glue, adding my little gift boxes, then adding the candle to the mouse that's blowing out the candles. This one is from Dandy Day, if you're wondering. But I will be sure to list all of the products, all of the stamp sets and dies I use down below, so you can always check there. Now it's time to add my little pop-up mechanism. I added score tape to 3 of the sides. And as you can see, I did it wrong. You need to make sure to add the tape or the adhesive to the back, the bottom, and the front of the little pop-up feature, not on the top. Now I'm adding my cake. And that's already looking really cute, but in a minute you'll see me realize a tiny problem. once you fold it down, the cake sticks out, which I didn't want because it's meant to be a surprise. So I'm just cutting off part of the bottom of the cake to make it a bit shorter. And now the cake isn't showing. I'm sorry I was out of frame for this one, but it was just showing by about 2 millimeters. So I just cut that off. I thought I could add more images to the grassy area, but again, those would have shown once you close the card, so I decided to just add the little mouse to the cake with liquid glue so that I would be sure that none of the elements would show and that it was a surprise for the recipient. Again, adding the gift boxes in about the same area again for my third panel. And this part is just really repetitive. It's quick to do. It really didn't take me long at all. I was surprised how fast it was to adhere all of the pop-up mechanisms. And now that I'm actually doing the voiceover, I realized I only needed 2 pop-up little thingies, not 3. Because just the second and the third actually have a pop-up feature. Again, having the adhesive on the back, the bottom, and the front of the little pop-up piece. Cutting off a little bit of the bottom of the cake. And there was a little bit of adhesive showing. And that's our third panel almost done. I really wanted it to tell kind of a story, so for the first one you have the cake with the candles lit, the little mouse just holding the lit candle. For the second, the little mouse is blowing out all of the candles. And on the third, couldn't wait, he's just digging into the cake because, I mean, it's his birthday, he can. So I just added the third little mouse using liquid glue. I pressed down the mechanism, as you can see me do a couple of times, just to make sure that everything is adhered nicely. I wanted his tail to kind of be flat against the bottom, and that kind of gave me a little bit of trouble because I had to score it at just the right angle. Now I want to add the happy as a die cut, but the die cut would be on the back once you flip it open, so I decided to add another happy on the last panel so that you can always see the happy birthday when you flip the card open. I just added a lot of the balloons, the tiny balloons that is, and also adding the jumping up mouse from Really Hi-Fi. And for this, you see I kind of scored along his little ears, but this was the only way I could fit him right above the happy. And if you're wondering about the spacing of the happy to the birthday, usually I would place them closer together, but again, I wanted to make sure that the part of the sentiment isn't showing when the card is closed, so this was as low as I could place it. Now just adding in the little mouse with liquid glue, making sure to press it into the fold with the score line that I created along the ears. And closing the card shut to adhere everything. Not quite stuck down yet. And there you can see I just placed some acrylic blocks on top of it while it's drying. For the bottom panel, I was afraid that the mechanism would snag if I added too many layers of die cuts, so I just decided on one layer, and I basically just placed the front balloon, used a pencil to draw around it and cut out the balloon at that angle so that I could adhere them next to each other so that they look layered but without actually adding any bulk. As you'll see in about a minute or two, no such luck, it was still snagging. I'm pretty sure I hugged the tab pieces around too tight so that there wasn't enough room to move. Also, I don't usually have any of the coordinating dies. I use a Brother's Scan and Cut. And the die cut edge is super smooth and like flush against the paper, whereas the die cut machine, the Brother, is blade cut, so you have more of a blunt edge. And I'm pretty sure that also contributed to the part snagging, which really bugged me, but you know, what can you do? So it was already assembled. I wasn't gonna throw away the card just because of that. Now I'm adding my balloons, realizing that one of them is too far to the edge because I was, at this point, still worried that it might snag. It really didn't help any, but you know, at this point I didn't know yet. But for future reference, if I ever do a card like this again, because I did have lots more images colored, I wanted to add the gift boxes and the cake there as well, but I worried that, again, the mechanism wouldn't work properly, so I didn't use them. And for the next time, I'll just go with the acetate solution that Kelly showed in the intro video, and you can just add basically like 3 layers of die cuts easy because the acetate makes the entire thing completely smooth. Just gluing down all of the balloons now. Drawing in the little balloon strings with a Copic multiliner. Also adding a little party hat to the mouse because I had it, so why not? And then it was time to add the first part, basically, of my sentiment. I wanted it to be overhanging on the tabs, so I just added glue to the very top of the front and end of the die cut and adhering it to the second layer. Just make sure there's not any adhesive down, basically past that layer, or you'll basically glue your entire mechanism shut. Adding in the little pull tab piece. And then it was time to adhere it to my card. I removed the backing paper. And again, if you're doing this, just make sure you don't hug the tabs around super tight. I would make sure that there's a little bit of wiggle room. This was only the first time I ever did a Flippin Awesome. So I did one basically just test of it months and months ago. So this was the first time I used it with images. And yeah, just make sure you have a little bit of wiggle room so you can add some die cut images to your pull out mechanism. Just used the little tab pieces with a score tape, pressing it down firmly because this is the only place the flipping mechanism is attached. And there you can see it works. And there you can see it doesn't. Oh my god, I was so bummed. I tried with a bone folder to get it smooth. As you can see, there's a little craft pick. I tried to like wedge it in there so that there's a little bit more room, but no dice. So I die cut the base piece, as you can see here, out of acetate. Added a strip of score tape to the top. Just carefully wiggled it in there, making sure it's aligned properly, and pressed it down. And there you can see, now it's moving smoothly. I pulled up the arrow that covers the bottom tab, as you can see, and now I'm just adding it back on top again because that hides the adhesive from the acetate. I used score tape on the back of the scallop panel because I wanted really strong adhesive on the back of this, because when somebody pulls on it, I just didn't want anything to move. I also used a very heavy weight cardstock for my card base. In this case, usually doesn't really matter that much, but because you really pull on it, I wanted to make sure it's really sturdy. I'm just using a T-square ruler to make sure it's straight before I pressed it down, because I did spend a lot of time on all this, so it would have really bugged me if I had heard it like all crooked. Just pressing everything down firmly, and there we basically have our card. Now I'm just using the Nuvo Aqua Shimmer pen in glitter gloss, just along the candles, the ribbons on, or the bows on all of the cake, gift boxes. Getting confused already. Just going over that. Just make sure that you don't press the panels together while the pen is still wet. If it touches a little bit, it dries really quickly, so it's not a big deal. I just flipped it around because it was easier for me to see behind the pop-up. My pen was getting a little bit too dry, so I just squeezed out a little bit onto some scrap piece of cardstock. The paper I used for the backing of the card is from the Dandy Day pattern paper set by Fawn. I don't think I said that before. Again, just on the cake layers, I also added some shimmer here on the candles, the little bows on the gifts. And I just love that little mouse that just looks like he just went to town on the cake. Also on the balloons, that's where I realized that I couldn't add any of the shimmer to the balloons that are behind the acetate because I didn't think of it before. I was so determined to make the mechanism work that I didn't think of the embellishment, but you know, next time. And there we go, guys, that's the card for today. And here you can see how the first layer of the cake pops up. The candles are on now. We have the little mouse blowing them out. Now he's going to town because it's his birthday and he can if he wants to. And there are just his friends coming for the party. Oh my god. Cards like this, they just make me happy. I had a blast making this one, and I do hope you give it a try because the little pop-up feature just adds such a fun element to the entire card and the Flippin Awesome mechanism. And I did have quite a few images left over, so I added them to the inside, and it says happy birthday, and the bottom reads have your cake and eat it too. Again, thanks so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this and that it was helpful and gave you some inspiration. I hope to see you back again for another crafty video really soon. I will link to 2 more videos on screen that may interest you. Have a wonderful day. Bye!